Are we live? I think we're live. New data from the US Census Bureau suggests that the housing market bubble just got even bigger, with the income levels of households across the US failing to grow substantially in 2024. This new report from the Census Bureau confirms that now is not a good time to buy a house and that there's a lot of downside on home prices going forward. In this video, I'm going to break down this data for you all so you can understand what's going on with this Census Bureau report. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at an article from the Wall Street Journal. It's talking about how inflation erased U.S. income gains last year. This article just came out a couple days ago, and it talks about how the median household income in America, folks, went up to $83,730 in 2024. That's how much the median household makes. And what's really concerning about this income data is it hasn't grown substantially in the last couple of years. You could see from 2019 to 2024, median incomes only grew by 22% for American earners, while home values went up by 49% in the same span, and while monthly mortgage payments went up by 92% in the same amount of time. So a lot of people are curious, Nick, why have you been calling for a housing market downturn in the last 4 years? And the reason is simple. The incomes that Americans are earning are not growing fast enough. And in fact, we now have a record home price to income ratio in America based on this Census Bureau update. And this is a metric you need to pay attention to as a potential home buyer and investor, the home price to income ratio, because that metric is going to help you determine whether now is a good time to buy a house in your market. And the overall issue for America right now, and why so many people are waiting on the sidelines to buy a house, is the fact that the home value to income ratio today, how much home prices cost versus incomes, is almost at a record level. We're at 4.3x. The typical home value in America of 364,000 last year was 4.3x the median income of 84,000. And you can see that there's really no historical context for home prices being this expensive relative to income, except the 2006 housing bubble before we had the big crash. You can see going back all the way to 1967, the home price to income ratio stayed in a range of around 2.4 to 3. Really, for 30 or 40 years, prices were very stable. And then starting in the mid 2000s, they went into a bubble. Then there was a crash, and then they entered another bubble after the pandemic. And this is something I think a lot of you intuitively understand as potential home buyers and investors, right? You go and look on Zillow, you look at how much houses cost, 400,000, 500, 600, 700,000, maybe even $1 million in certain areas, and you say to yourself, like, that feels overpriced. That feels like I might lose money if I buy it, or that just feels like I can't afford it. You guys can let me know what you think of the prices in your neighborhood when you go on Zillow or Redfin. But what I want you to understand through watching this video is that you're not crazy if you think that, right? You're not crazy if you think that these prices are way too high and need to come down. And there's a lot of people in real estate who want you to think that that's not going to happen, right? There's a lot of people in real estate who just want you to buy right now. A lot of realtors just want you to buy right now. A lot of investors just want you to buy right now. A lot of builders just want you to buy right now. And they want you to think that the market's always going to go up. They want you to think that it's a great value to buy today. But when you look at this data from the census and you compare it to home values, you can see very clearly that you'd be buying at an excessively high price if you bought in today's market. And actually what I want to do for you guys right now is break down some of these income statistics from the US Census Bureau in more detail, because I think it's really interesting to understand just how much money Americans are making. There's 130, 140 million households in the US. How much money are we making as a society? And is the growth in our income enough to sustain what's going on in the economy? And so we're going to actually take a look here, everyone. and actually look at this census report. And for those of you who aren't aware, the census does every year kind of like a mini census called the American Community Survey, where they survey around 3 or 4 million people and they update every year the income statistics and other demographic statistics like that. So you could see on September 9th, the Census Bureau announced that the median income was $83,730 in 2024, which wasn't statistically significant from the previous year. But as we go down, we can see there's some interesting differences in how income grew for different segments of the population. So one of the first things that sticks out is that among full-time year-round workers, median earnings increased a lot more for men in 2024 than they did for women. For men, income went up 3.7%, but did not change significantly for women. Actually, we saw in 2024 the female to male earnings ratio fell to 80.9%, down from 82.7%. So the wage gap actually got bigger. We can actually see, additionally, one of the positives actually from this report was that the poverty rate did go down. The poverty rate went down to 10.6%. Fewer people are in poverty, but get this, folks. A family of four, the poverty line for a family of four in America is $32,000. So when you hear that poverty statistic, only 10% of households are in poverty, they're setting that threshold at 32,000. So if you make 33,000 as a family of four, you're not in poverty. And this is the same for all different cities and states. So, if you go and look in different cities where the cost of living is higher, the relative poverty can be a lot higher. And, this is data, everyone, that we actually track on Reventure app. We try to help you as a home buyer investor dig into this income data. And we have this income data for every zip code in the US so you can make a better decision when it comes to buying a house. But what I want to do right now is actually walk you through some areas in America where you can actually afford to buy a house at today's median income. So the median income for a household in the US is 84,000. What are the areas of the country where you can actually afford to buy at that price, where maybe there isn't a big bubble, where maybe there actually still is some affordability? I think it's really interesting for you guys to know this. As this video goes on, I'm going to talk about some of the places where there isn't affordability and where the bubble is bigger, but I want to just start actually by talking about the places that are more affordable. And what we're going to do here on Reventure app is look at a metric called salary to afford a house. How much money do you need to make to be able to buy a house in these different states and cities in the US based on the house payment to income ratio? The house payment to income ratio being 30% or lower, because that's the general rule of thumb, is that you shouldn't pay more than 30% of your income on buying a house. Now, you can see in a state like New York, folks, you got to make 144,000. In a state like California, you got to make 199,000. But in a state like Iowa, you actually only need to make $64,000 to buy a house. In a state like Ohio, you only need to make $67,000 to buy a house. In a state like Arkansas, you could actually make $55,000 and afford to buy a house in late 2025 at today's prices and mortgage rates. And if we were to actually go here to the filters tab and we were to just use that median income and just say, okay, let's max it out at 84,000 and say to ourselves, what are the areas where the median household in the US could actually buy a house? What would they be? Well, you can see it's predominantly in the Midwest and the Deep South. There's around, what is it? Only a handful of states. There's around 10 to 15 states where you could still afford to buy a house, making less than 84,000. Now, if we were to go to different cities, I think this gets more interesting. What are the cities where you can still afford to buy a house making less than $84,000, where maybe the minimum population is 500,000 people? You can see it's not a lot. It's a short list of cities that makes it on this list. There's actually, folks, only 36 cities in America where you can afford to buy a house on less than $84,000. You could see them here in front of you: Harrisburg, Pennsylvania; Chattanooga, Tennessee; Cincinnati, Ohio; Lexington, Kentucky; San Antonio, Texas; Syracuse, New York. We're going to go through more of these as the video goes on, but the overall point is there's actually not a lot of areas where the average household, the median household in the US, can afford to buy and I'll work more with this data as this video goes on and actually take some of your requests. But one interesting thing I actually wanted to ask you guys, and this is kind of a personal question, right? And you don't need to say anything in the comment section below. But I was curious actually how much money you guys make, those who watch my channel, and kind of where you fall in the demographics here of median income. And if you guys are above average, are you above the median income for the US? Are you below the median income for the US? Are you right around the median income for the US? And I actually polled you all, and, because this is an anonymous way to kind of get your feedback. And I polled you all and I asked you, how much money do you guys anticipate to earn in 2025 before taxes? And the results were pretty interesting. And actually, that's another interesting point. All of this is before taxes. So when I'm talking about median income, 84,000 in the US, that's gross income before taxes. When I polled you all, what's your expected, and let's actually just refresh this. What's your expected before tax income range in the 2025 calendar year? Well, 1,200 of you have voted in this so far, and the results are pretty interesting. 18% of you anticipate making less than $50,000. 34% of you anticipate making between 50,000 and 100,000. 32% of you anticipate making between 100,000 and 200,000. And around 17% of you anticipate making over $200,000. And so that's kind of the distribution of income of those who watch this channel. We'll see if this poll changes a little bit. But what I thought was interesting is that this distribution here for you guys is pretty close to the US average. So 49% of you make over 100,000. If we look here at a table from Statista, you can see it's actually around 40% of the US population now makes over 100,000. So 40% of US households now make over 100,000. For you guys watching this channel, it's 49%. But this actually surprised me looking at this chart from Statista, because you can see 17% of Americans make 100 to 150 grand, 10% make 150 to 200,000, 14% make over 200,000. So 40% of US households now make over $100,000. And why I think that's really interesting is that, when I was growing up, I was growing up in the late 90s, mid 2000s, $100,000 income was known as like being a big deal, right? A six-figure income, right? That was known as like you made it if you made $100,000. And I think despite the median income in the US still being less than $100,000, I think in a lot of cities you can make 100,000, you can make 150,000, you can make 200,000, and that's no longer well-to-do. That's like, in fact, that's middle class now in a lot of different cities and states in America with how high housing costs are. And this has to do with inflation, right? Like, why does 100,000 not feel like it did 20 years ago? Still a decent income, don't get me wrong. Still a decent income, still above average. But why does it not feel like it did 20 years ago? And that has to do with how much the cost of everything else have gone up, right? Inflation, especially since the pandemic, has gone up 23, 24%. Inflation since the pandemic. The cost of buying a house, just how much the home value has gone up, that's 48% since the pandemic. And mortgage payments, that's gone up 90% since the pandemic. Rent has also gone up around 30 to 35%. So when the costs of everything else go up faster than the incomes, it's going to make the same level of income not feel as good. And I think this table here is one that you guys should really understand if you're a potential home buyer, if you're a potential investor, trying to understand this market, right? And wanting to understand, like, are we in a bubble? Are prices going to crash? Like, where are values going to go? Understand these basic fundamentals, because income underpins the US housing market, and it always has. The income levels are ultimately what determines where home prices will go in the long run. How much money are people making? That is the fundamental bedrock of the housing market. And you could see the median household income in the US went from 69,000 to 84,000 from 2019 to 2024. So before the pandemic, typical household in the US made 69,000. And a household, everyone, means just people under one roof at one address. It could just be one person living in a household. It could be four people living in a household. In 2019, that median household made 69,000. In 2024, they made 84,000. 22% income growth in 5 years. Median family income has gone up a little bit more. Median family income was 86,000 in 2019. And what that means is basically when family members live in a household. So when family members live in a husband, it could be, husband and wife, it could be husband, wife, and a child, it could be multi-generational. They now make 106,000. So family households make 106,000, that's 23%. But here's where things get really kind of iffy for the housing market, kind of scary. Typical home value from Zillow in the same span has gone from 245 to 364. That's 49% growth. Meanwhile, the existing sales price of houses from the NAR has gone from 270 to 406. That's 50% growth. So prices and values of homes have gone up more than 2 times income growth. Home values going up more than 2 times the rate of income growth the last 5 years, which helps explain everything we're seeing in the market now. The low buyer demand, the fact that prices are now dropping in half the country. Why? It's because they went up too much relative to income. At the same time, everyone, it gets even worse. The mortgage rate went from 394 to 672, which means that your monthly mortgage payment went from 1461 to 2800, a 92% increase. So the monthly mortgage payment went up 92% the last 5 years, while the median income went up 22%. And people wonder, why is this housing market so messed up? Why have buyers dropped out of the market left and right? Why do we have the lowest home buyer demand literally on record, folks? I don't know if you all know this, but we have the lowest home buyer demand on record. Existing home sales are at literally the lowest level since 2008 right now, and they've been that way the last 2 years. This is a graph on home buyer demand. The demand is really low. Why is the demand really low? Well, the mortgage payments are up 92%, the income is up 22%. And the reason I'm spending so much time going through this data is so you all have a real fundamental understanding of what is going on in this market. There's one thing that bothers me, maybe more than anything else, is when I see people in real estate who often work in the industry and who make money off of sales and transactions, when I see them trying to say that now is a good time to buy, and that, they try to even like make fun of people who aren't buying. They try to make fun of people who can't afford to buy and be like, oh, you don't own. Folks, the data is so clear. We're in one of the biggest housing bubbles of all time, if not the biggest housing bubble of all time, based on data from the US Census Bureau. This isn't speculative. This isn't some alternative data source. This is the main data source of the US government coming out and telling us that Americans do not make enough money to afford homes and to buy homes. The question is, what happened the last 2 times we got in this type of bubble? Because if you want to make a decision about should you buy a house now or should you wait, well, you should definitely look at the data in your area on Reventure app, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. But first, you should understand where we are in the historical housing cycle and what has happened before when we've gotten to this point. And I think this data is really instructive. And what I'm going to do, folks, is show you a data point called home value to family income ratio. So we talked about family income. And the reason I'm showing you family income here is because that data from the census actually goes back all the way to 1953. So we actually have 71 years of data here on the housing market, how affordable or unaffordable it is. And what you can see, folks, is that the home value to family income ratio today is 3.45. 3.45 is one of the highest levels on record. The long-term average is 2.7. So we're in a bubble. Home prices are way above where they are compared to the normal levels of family income. But take a look at the last 2 times this happened. This has happened before. 2006 was the one last time, and then 1954 were the only other 2 times in the last 70 years where the housing market was this expensive for a family to buy a house. And, the question is, what then happened after both of those instances in 1954 and 2006? Well, folks, you could see it here on the graph in front of you. The housing market became way cheaper in the subsequent decade in both instances. So from 1954, the home value to a family income ratio dropped from 3.9 all the way to 2.1 in 1973. Literally, the housing market got 50% cheaper over 17 years from 1954 to 1973. Then, 2006, The home value to family income ratio peaked at 3.6. It dropped all the way to 2.6 by 2012 and stayed in that range of 2.6 up until the pandemic. And so what this graph shows you is that there's no historical precedent for home prices staying this high relative to income. They won't stay this high relative to income. There's no historical precedent for that. The question is, how does the affordability get achieved? Because there's two ways that the housing market can become more affordable. One is prices dropping. The other is incomes going up. Both of those things would make home prices more affordable. Like if the $500,000 house you guys are looking at right now to buy became 350, well, that would make it more affordable. That might make it a no-brainer to buy. Conversely, if your income went from 100,000 to 200,000, that $500,000 house might not have to get any cheaper. You just got 2 times as wealthy. You could afford it at that point. So we're either going to see declining prices or increasing incomes or some combination thereof. Now, what's really interesting is what happened after 1954. After 1954, we actually didn't see prices drop. Prices stayed stable for like 15 years. The typical value of a house in 1954 was $16,000, which is crazy to think about. You could buy a house for 16,000. Now the typical family made $4,000 a year back then. So the income back in 1954 was 4,000. If we fast forward all the way to 1969, you can see the home value went up to 20,000. So the home value only increased by like $3,000 or $4,000, but the family income doubled. The income growth in the 50s and 60s was wild. Family incomes were going up anywhere from 5 to 10% a year in the 50s and 60s. Huge income boom. And then in the inflationary period of the 70s, incomes were going up 10% a year. So the 1970s was known as a period that was very good for the housing market, actually. There was a big inflation in the 1970s. Some people think we're going to have another inflation this time around. Well, what I would tell those people is to see another inflation like the 1970s, we're going to have to see income growth go up 10% a year. Do you think income growth is going to go up 10% a year going forward? You guys can let me know. The long-term average family income growth going back 70 years is 4.7%. And we were actually at 5% in 2024. So you can see the income growth starting in like the early 90s, income growth just fell off the table and never got back to the levels it was at from the 50s to the 70s. And so, some people say, hey, Nick, well, maybe some of the things you're saying about the housing market are right, but what about like the devaluation of the dollar? And what about like the fact that the dollar isn't worth anything anymore, is what some people say. What does that mean for the housing market? It doesn't mean anything, really, folks. Like, what matters is income growth. If we have like crazy inflation, like actual, like bad inflation, like the 1970s, and enter a wage price spiral, incomes will go up because the money supply is going out of control. So if you're trying to spot like, are we going to go into an inflationary wage price spiral that's going to cause home prices to go up? Look at income growth. And the income growth now is saying we're not in that situation. The income growth now is saying we're in a situation much more similar to what we saw in the mid 2000s. This situation is much more similar to the mid 2000s compared to the early 1950s, where income growth is kind of okay to not that great, okay, maybe decent in certain years. Um, and certainly in 2025, 2026, doesn't seem like income growth is going to get a lot better. Labor market is weakening. AI is causing maybe wage suppression in certain industries. So, I think the moral of this story, everyone, is incomes are what matter. And the census is reporting that incomes are not going up fast enough. So what you guys got to determine is, what does this data look like for your area? And I'm actually going to start taking some of your requests, everyone. We actually have a live chat going on right here. Already a lot of you are commenting in this live chat. Let's look at some of these comments and see what people are saying. I can see you guys have already taken an interest in this topic. Jose, what does Jose say? Jose Lopez says, asking a realtor if now is a good time to buy is like asking an alcoholic if they would like a drink. That's kind of true. There are some good realtors out there, everyone, though. I don't think we should just bash all realtors. There's actually a lot of realtors that watch this channel. There are a lot of realtors that are trying to be informed, but unfortunately, it's a low barrier to entry industry where a lot of people enter who are just looking to make a quick buck. So you do have some realtors who just, kind of just try to say whatever. Um, Okay, what else? Krista says she lowballed on a house in Pembroke Pines, Florida, got rejected, but the house is still on the market 1 month later. What's the prediction for this zip? 33029. This is very interesting, everyone, because I was actually just talking to a friend who was telling me about their friend in Columbus, Ohio, who just listed a couple houses on the market and pulled them off the market. They were, rejected the offers that they received. And a lot of sellers in this current market like aren't wanting to accept where home prices are going. Um, maybe they have a fixed idea of what their house is worth. Maybe they painted the garage or something and redid the roof and did a bar in the basement. I don't know. And they think that's worth the house being listed like $100,000 above what comps are sometimes, or 50,000 above what comps are. I think, we're seeing sellers come to market. We're seeing some of them accept lowball offers. We're seeing others just pull their listing. So if you are trying to make, mark offers below list price, just understand some sellers are just trying to get a fanciful price. Others are trying to actually sell their house or might come around in the next 6 to 12 months. Let's see, everyone. Let's see. So Krista is talking about 33029 in Pembroke Pines. 33029 in Pembroke Pines, which is in Miami, everyone. So let's take a look here. 33029. And I think this is the type of analysis, folks, that you guys got to do for yourself. Now, folks, off the bat, 33029 here, and we're near Miami, everyone, Fort Lauderdale, Miami. And I'm going to take your requests and go through some different cities, and I'm going to kind of teach you guys how to evaluate this housing market. Salary to afford a house. You need to make $191,000 a year to afford a house in this zip code. So this is an expensive zip code. Where have values gone in the last year? They're down 2.5%. So that's good news. Prices are already dropping in the zip code. Where does Reventure App think they're going to go the next year? Well, we think they're going to drop 7% in the next 12 months, Krista. So, this would say you were smart to give below market offer, below list offer, because this is an area that we think is going to drop. And, why do we think this area is going to drop? Because I want to show you guys the justification behind these forecasts. We're not just coming up with this out of thin air. This is a model looking at a bunch of different factors in each zip code. Look at the inventory here. 112 homes for sale last year. Now there's 207 homes for sale this year. Good chance, Krista, your seller maybe is not aware of this data. Your seller might still be thinking we're in 74 home inventory territory from 2 years ago. We're at 200 homes now on the market. We are at days on market, Krista, of 60 days on market. So we're record DOM, record inventory, and how about price cuts? Can we get the trifecta? Record inventory, record DOM, record price cuts. Not quite, but we have 31% price cut rate in August. That's above the long-term average of 23%. I feel very confident, Krista, that this zip code is going to decline over the next year. See if you can send the seller some of that data, because it might help them get around. All right. What else do we got, everyone? What else? Corey has an interesting question. How do we use inflation to invest in a house? My income is going up. How dependable is investing based on that alone? So I kind of answered that question already, Corey. Inflation only really matters for the housing market in the sense of, is our incomes going up on a national basis? So the last time we had big inflation in the housing market was the 1970s. Was the time we had big inflation, like real inflation. Why did home prices go up during that inflation? It's because incomes went up. Family income growth, 8%, 9%, 10%, 11%. Look at these massive income growth statistics in the 70s. So if you're thinking about inflation being a reason to buy a house, I would challenge you and say to yourself, well, are incomes going up enough? Your income might be going up, Corey, which is great for you. But the average American, average family income went up 5% year over year. Average household income went up 3.5%. And, for these statistics, over the last 5 years, they're only up 22 to 23%. So think about that. 5 year growth on income the last 5 years, 22%. In the 1970s, we were doing 10% in 1 year on income. So we're just not even close yet to what I would call a real inflationary scenario, which is called a wage price spiral, where CPI goes nuts, home prices go nuts, and like incomes also go nuts. People basically make more money and then spend more money and then demand bigger wages. We're not in that type of economy right now. So I would just say that's my pushback on, claiming inflation is a reason to buy a house. Um, Okay, what else do we got, everyone? According to Crash, Connecticut is getting really expensive. That's very true, everyone. Connecticut is getting expensive. Did you guys know that Connecticut is one of the hottest housing markets in America? I mean, this is like one of the best kept secrets. Home values in Connecticut went up 3.8% in the last year. They went up 4.4% in New York, 2.9% in Pennsylvania, 4.1% in New Jersey. So we are still seeing home values go up in the Northeast. In the Northeast. In Connecticut, you need to make $128,000 to buy a house. Salary to afford a house in Connecticut's $128,000. So you're right. It is expensive to buy. Now here's what's wild. Prior to the pandemic, you could make 55,000 in Connecticut and buy a house. Now it's 128,000. Look at how much the salary to afford a house has gone up in Connecticut. Interestingly, Reventure App thinks prices in Connecticut are going to go up 6.9% over the next year. We have a heavy upward forecast in Connecticut, but folks, there is no inventory on the market here. There is absolutely no inventory. Look at this. Before the pandemic in Connecticut, there was 18,000 homes. Now there's 5,000 homes. There's no homes for sale. There's no listings. As long as this inventory shortage exists, prices will keep going up. And so this is another thing I would say. If you're trying to understand like and come up with an investment strategy to buy a house, forget inflation. Look at what's going on in your market right now on inventory, DOM, price cuts. That's going to tell you way more about the reality of the market and where things are going to head in the future. Let's take these national narratives on things like inflation, shove them to the side, and actually look at what's going on in your individual market. Are prices already dropping in your market? Are they going to drop more in the future in your zip code? The data is there for you to access on Reventure App to answer those questions so you can make a more informed decision and actually save money on your home purchase in 2025 going into 2026. All right, what other questions do we got, everyone? What other questions? Oh, all right. Ooh, this is an interesting market here. New Jersey. So we have a lot of Northeast right now in the comment section. Let's take a look about New Jersey. What's going on in New Jersey's housing market? Well, folks, Jersey is very similar to Connecticut. Prices are up 4.1% over the last year. To afford to buy a house in New Jersey today, you need to make 171,000. That is wild. You need to make 171,000 to buy in New Jersey. You need to make 176,000 to buy in Massachusetts. So when you look at this data, it makes Florida look a lot better. So in Florida, you only need to make 99,000 to buy a house. So this would be the bull case for Florida, right? If I had to come up with a bull case for Florida, it's 2 times more expensive still to buy a house in New Jersey when you figure mortgage, taxes, and insurance. 2 times more expensive to buy a house in New Jersey than Florida. So that's the bull case. The Northeast people are still priced out. You still might see some Northeast people move down to Florida and buy, or move down to Texas to buy, where you only need to earn 85,000 to buy a house in Texas. So there's still some relative affordability in Texas and Florida. But even look at Tennessee, folks. In Tennessee now you need to make 83,000 to buy a house. The thing that worries me about these markets, like Florida, Tennessee, and Texas, is what it was before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, you could buy a house in Texas making $42,000 a year. $42,000 a year could get you a house in Texas. You could qualify for a mortgage. You could comfortably buy a house at $42,000 a year in Texas. Now it's $85,000. So we don't have any historical precedent for these increases in costs in markets like Texas and Florida. One of the reasons why we have a minus 5.7% forecast in Texas's housing market over the next 12 months. One of the reasons why Texas is already going down. What other areas you guys want me to cover here? Oh, yeah. No shoes, no shirt says Houston property taxes are ridiculous. It's true. Texas has very high property taxes. A lot of people don't know that. Property tax rates in Texas are kind of similar to what they are in the Northeast in states like Connecticut and New York. Sean says everyone keeps saying New Jersey is the hottest market. That is true. New Jersey is the hottest market alongside Connecticut. Um, let's see. Your owner says might be time for me to leave Colorado. Well, Colorado is definitely an expensive market. In Colorado, you have to make 137,000 to buy a house. And it's even worse. It's even worse in Denver. In Denver, you have to make 146,000 to buy a house. Now, it's really interesting, everyone. is when you guys go on Reventure app after this video, which you should definitely do to look at this data in more detail, you can see there's big differences by like zip code. So start getting into the zip code level data here. If you're a serious home buyer and investor, look at the zip code level data and see that salary to afford a house in your market. See the areas where you can actually afford to buy a house, right? Like if you're in this process of researching where you should buy, moving to a new city especially, get the lay of the land and see how much money you need to make to buy by zip code, salary to afford a house by zip code. You can see there's some zip codes in Denver where you could buy with $100,000. There's other zip codes where you need to make $200,000 to buy in Denver. So it's a very bifurcated market. Another area that would really be like this is Dallas, the big D. I used to live in Dallas, and I can tell you guys, it's a market that's very bifurcated, right? Like if you want to buy in downtown Dallas or if you want to buy up at Highland Park, you have to make $500,000 a year to buy in Highland Park, at least, probably even more than that, to be honest. But if you want to buy on the south side of Dallas, well, you could buy with $50,000 a year. Huge difference, literally a 10x difference in affordability by zip code, just being a couple miles away. So this is really important data. If you're a regular home buyer, just someone trying to buy a first house, maybe you're trying to buy your first investment property, understand these metrics on salary to afford a house, understand these metrics on income, and understand how it looks compared to its historical average, right? Because this is also the important point, right? Is the fact that in many of these markets, they used to be affordable, now they're no longer affordable. Now the salary to afford a house is above the median income. All right, what other requests do we have, everyone? Crash just said he downloaded Reventure app. Thank you for doing that. I think you're going to love it. How about California, everyone? Actually, I want to check a zip code in South Carolina. Can you check the zip code 29154 in South Carolina? 29154. Let's check that out, everyone. Where are we in South Carolina? 29154. I don't know if you guys have ever been to South Carolina. I've been there a couple times. Charleston's a nice city. 29154. I couldn't even. What metro is this? Sumter. So this would be in the middle of the state, near Columbia. All right. Well, what's going on here? We got a lot of rural areas actually on Reventure app, everyone. If you're looking to buy a house kind of in the middle of nowhere, chances are we have the data for you. 29154, values up 1% over the last year. Where do we think they're going to go over the next year? We think they're going to go down 1.2%. So this is a market that we would call fairly balanced. Prices might start to drop. You can see it's gone from a heavy seller's market to more of a buyer's market, but it's not going to crash. Our forecast is minus 1.2% over the next 12 months based on the inventory, based on the price cuts, based on the DOM. What else we got? What else we got, everyone? How about 30097 in Georgia? 30097 in Georgia, according Vivian's Private Kitchen. Is that the name of your business? Vivian Private Kitchen wants me to look at Georgia, Johns Creek. Johns Creek, everyone. Now, where is Johns Creek? Let's zoom out. This is north of Atlanta. This is north of Atlanta. Now, in the last year, prices here are flat. Actually, I want to look at the salary to afford a house here because I have a feeling it's probably a more expensive area. Oh my goodness. You have to make $192,000 a year to buy a house here north of Atlanta. This is near Alpharetta, everyone. So Atlanta is a very bifurcated market. North of Atlanta, you need to make a lot of money to buy. South of Atlanta, you don't need to make a lot of money to buy. Now, what's really interesting about your zip code, Vivian, is that this is one of the few areas in Atlanta where we actually think prices are going to go up over the next 12 months. So you can see we have blue almost everywhere in the Atlanta metro. Massive metro area. We think prices are going to drop in almost every zip code in the metro over the next 12 months. There's a lot of inventory in Atlanta, higher DOM. But in Johns Creek, we actually think values are going to go up 3.4%. Why is that? Why do we think values are going to go up? Well, we're still in a slight seller's market in Johns Creek. I don't know if you feel that, Vivian. You can let me know what you kind of feel when you're there on the market. How are sellers being? But we think prices are actually still going to go up in Johns Creek, Georgia over the next 12 months. What about some other requests here, everyone? Serena says, finally caught the live. Yeah, leave a request, Serena. Let's see if I can get to it. Okay. Palm Springs, California. Dudley wants me to look at Palm Springs, California. Now, do you guys know where Palm Springs is? This is out in the desert in California. This is near Coachella, I believe. People go out here every April. Coachella's to the east. People come out here every April to go to music festivals. A lot of Airbnbs here in Palm Springs, California. Well, Market's not doing so well. Or it's doing great if you're a buyer. Prices are down 5.5% here in Palm Springs in the last year. Good news. This value is going down. A lot of Airbnb owners selling. Where do we think prices are going to go the next year? We think they're going to drop another 7% in Palm Springs 92262. Now, why do we think that, everyone? Why do we think prices are going to drop another 7%? Look at the inventory. Inventory is now through the roof. We went from 79 homes for sale to 379 homes for sale. At the same time, days on market has gone to 83 days. Highest days on market in a decade in Palm Springs. And so again, this is just a great example, right? If you are an investor, especially, or a home buyer, and you're trying to time the market or think about when you should buy, and you're thinking about all these national narratives, just make it simple. What's happening in your zip code? Is inventory piling up? Is DOM surging? Are price cuts surging? If those things are happening, your market's more likely to drop, regardless of Fed rate cuts, regardless of some narrative on inflation. Your market is more likely to drop if the inventory, the DOM, and the price cuts are going up. So I just really want you guys to get local with your housing market analysis and housing market decision making. All right, Alberto has a great question. Alberto has a great question. When are prices in Miami-Dade coming down? I know a lot of you are in Southern Florida, Southeast Florida. It's a frustrating market, Southern Florida, because it is very expensive. And it's a market that used to be affordable. So if we zoom out here on Reventure app, and folks, you can access all this data at www.reventure.app for every county, metro, zip code in America. All this data is at your fingertips on inventory, DOM, price cuts, salary to afford a house, and our 12-month forecast. You can use this data to basically confidently set up your strategy to buy, and you can also use it to negotiate cheaper prices. We've had some buyers in the last couple months negotiate 50 to 80,000 below list price based on the data on Reventure app. They send it to the seller. The seller says, "Oh my goodness, this market's going down. I better sell." So, what about Miami though? In Miami-Dade County especially, right? So we're going to shift to county view here on Reventure app. There's over 3,100 counties in the U.S. Miami-Dade's one of them. And the good news, Alberto, is values are already dropping in Miami-Dade. They're down 2.4% in the last 12 months. Now, that's not as much, say, as Naples. In Naples, they're down 7.3. In Palm Beach, they're down 5.2. But in Miami, they're down 2.4. Now, where do we think they're going to go in the next 12 months? We think they're going to go down another 2.3% in the next 12 months. So we have a modest correction starting in Miami. We think it's going to continue over the next year in Miami-Dade County, but we're not yet in like full crash phase. I would be careful though if I'm in Broward County, our forecast is minus 6.7. So Broward County, Palm Beach, values have already dropped by more. We think they're going to drop by more in the future. Miami-Dade's holding on a little bit better, but values are officially going down in Miami-Dade. All right, everyone. How long have I been doing this live stream so far? 42 minutes. This is getting pretty long. I gotta, wrap it up soon. Going to a concert tonight here in Nashville. Got to make sure I get there on time. All right. Oh, okay. San Antonio. San Antonio is an interesting market. Okay, so we have two areas being spammed here in the comment section. Farragut, which is East Tennessee, Knoxville, and then San Antonio. Which one should I do first? Um, this is funny. All right, 78261. 78261. San Antonio. Folks, San Antonio is already down by a decent amount. So San Antonio in the last 3 years is down 7.2%. In the last year, it's down 3.2%. And this particular zip code, which is in northern San Antonio, is down 2% in the last year. We think prices are going to drop 2.5% in the next year. So, this area is doing better. Like central San Antonio is getting hit a lot harder. Northern San Antonio is doing a little bit better. Prices here are a bit more expensive. The other request was for a town near Knoxville called Farragut, which is to the west of Knoxville. This is a nice suburb in Knoxville. So this is like the Knoxville metro here. University of Tennessee is in Knoxville. This is about 2 hours from Nashville. Prices here are up 1.5%. Wow, folks. Western Knoxville here is actually low key really nice. Typical value of a house is 646,000. You need to make 160 grand to buy in this zip code. Look how bifurcated Knoxville is. Basically, if you're to the north and to the east, you could buy with $60,000, $70,000. If you're to the west, southwest in Knoxville, you got to make 160 grand to even be in the game, be in the door. Well, 1.5% increase in the last 12 months here, and we think values in the next 12 months are going to go down 1.9%. 1.9% drop the next 12 months. This area was a huge seller's market, has now shifted to a buyer's market. Prices will drop in the next year. It's a wealthier area. We don't think a crash is coming here quite yet, but it has started tilting down. You'll see more homes for sale this winter. I should say you should see more price cuts this winter here west of Knoxville. I have time for one more request, everyone. And before I get to that request, I just want to let you guys know. Go to www.reventure.app to access all of this data for yourself. If you're a serious home buyer investor, having this data at your fingertips is imperative before you make the biggest financial decision of your life, especially buying into a national housing bubble. You need to understand what's going on in your local market. To do that, go to www.reventure.app, which I'm just going to show you how to do real quick here. www.reventure.app, and just get started very simply by typing in your city or zip code. Type in your city or zip code and see what the data is saying in your market. Are prices going up? Are they going down? You could see here on the west coast of Florida, we have a minus 10% forecast year over year. To access that forecast and see if prices are going to drop 10% in your zip code, or maybe they're going to go up in your zip code based on the data, sign up for a premium plan. It's $49 a month, which is ultimately less than 0.02% of the cost of buying a house. This $49 plan can help you save potentially $49,000, especially if you're buying in a market where prices are dropping. Additionally, consider signing up for the annual pass where you can save 32%. You can save 32% on the annual pass. It knocks it down to 33 a month, everyone. 33 a month is less than 0.01% of the cost of buying a house. Ultimately, very affordable price to have all this data in your tool belt to make a more informed decision. But let's get to the last request, everyone, because I think it's really important for those of you that join the live stream, to have me help you look at the data. So where do you guys want me to look at for the last request here? Oh wow, we got a lot of requests here. How do I pick which one to go with? Oh, Serena wants me to look at Minnesota, 55327. We also got Sugarland, Texas, Prescott, Arizona. Also, we got Vegas as well. A lot of requests here. How about we start 55327? Don't get tons of people from Minnesota here on the channel, so it's good to see. 55327. Got to log back in here to my premium subscription on Reventure app. I also pay the $49 a month, everyone, myself. So let's see, 55027. Was that it, everyone? 5. I apologize. There's so many requests now in the chat. I can't even keep them straight. 55327. This is in Dayton, Minnesota. I didn't even know Dayton, Minnesota existed. I knew Dayton, Ohio existed. Dayton, Minnesota. It's to the northwest of Minneapolis, for those of you that weren't aware. Northwest Minneapolis. Salary to afford a house here. Got to make 135,000. We're getting some requests for nice suburbs here in this live stream. Some more affluent places to buy a house. Well, in the last 12 months here, this zip code's up 2.4%. You can see most of Minneapolis is still up, except for downtown Minneapolis, which is down. But most of Minneapolis is still up, metro area. We can see, though, our 12-month price forecast. What does that look like? Flat. So our 12-month price forecast here is flat in northwest Minneapolis. The reason is we've shifted now from a heavy seller's market. Ooh, just in the last year, we're now officially in a buyer's market. So this is good news for you, Serena. We're now in a buyer's market. This is the first time we've really been in a buyer's market since a brief period right before the pandemic. And that means more inventory, more price cuts, more DOM. But we're not going to see a crash here just yet. We might not even see a crash at all in this type of affluent neighborhood, but you are going to see more houses for sale, more price cuts, and you could potentially negotiate a below market transaction, but we think prices here are going to be stable for the next 12 months. Go to www.reventure.app to see what this data looks like for your city and zip code. The monthly plan is $49. The annual plan is only $33 a month, less than 0.01% of the cost of buying a house. To gain all the data that I showed you in this